All right. Again, thank you so much for being here. My name is Felicia Gallegos. I am the Outreach and Prevention Coordinator for the Savvy office here at Utah State. My pronouns are she, her, and I am so thankful to be the host of this conversation today, but I really don't want to talk too much. I really want to turn the time over to my panelists today, and I am here to learn along with you all in this space today. So with that being said, the topic of today's conversation is the dehumanization of Asian women. And I am going to start by allowing our panelists to introduce themselves. And we will go ahead and start with Elizabeth. And then after Elizabeth, we'll go with Kayleen. And then we'll go to Jamal Jared and then Jenny. If you guys forget that order, it's okay. I will remind you. But go ahead, Elizabeth. Just feel free to introduce whatever you want about yourself.
So I'm Elizabeth. I'm a doctoral student here in psychology, in clinical psychology. I'm Chinese Canadian and 1.5 generation. Lived in Toronto for most of my life before, and lived in Hong Kong and Vancouver before coming here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kayleen Lamb. I go by she, they pronouns. A little bit about myself. I'm a sociology and social work major here at Utah State University. I am born and raised in Logan, Utah. So I am a first generation Asian American. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
All right, my name is Jamal Jared Alexander. I am a PhD candidate in the Technical Communication and Rhetoric Department. I'm also the university's diversity recruitment officer, so I do a lot of work with the graduate school as well as with the Inclusion Center. And I am excited to be here today.
Hi, my name is Jenny Nguyen. I use she, her pronouns. I am also a social work major at USU. I was born and raised in North Logan, but I have a Vietnamese background.
Wonderful. So we have a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to jump right into the questions. Thank you all again so much for being here. I think that this conversation is long overdue, and I am so thankful to be able to learn from you all today. So to start, I want to speak more broadly about the historical experience of the AAPI community. And for those who aren't familiar with the acronym AAPI, it does stand for or references the Asian American, or Pacific Islander, those that are of that descent. So let's just start by talking about the historical experiences of the AAPI community. And following that, or in conjunction with talking about the history, if you all want to touch on if you feel like we've changed as a society, are we still where we used to be, or have we changed? What has your experience been?
Okay, so a little bit about the context and the history of the AAPI community and the hypersexualization of Asian women. We can bridge it all the way back to the very beginning of when, I guess, the integration or globalization of other groups around the world. And not the idea of hypersexualization came to be like more of a recognized thing during World War II to the Korean and Vietnamese War. So with that, like, we have our military, our men, and like how it relates to prostitution. So like back in the day, they would, so to cater for our American military, we would recognize there are Asian prostitutes that cater for those needs. And so that's how it like started to skyrocket in this idea of like Asian women being, oh, like they satisfy all the American dream or something like that, in regarding to like the beauty and like the standard that everyone wants. They see it as the exotic, as well as erotic type of individual that caters to these fantasies that we most commonly see throughout American history. It's like, oh, Asian women are very submissive. They'll do whatever I want. They have these like long silky hair. They, along with other things that revolve around this stereotype that, oh, they'll do anything we want. They'll cook, they'll clean, they'll make me happy. And I think it's really interesting that the most ideal type for majority of white men is actually Asian women, because of all these stereotypes that are ingrained and passed on through generation and generation. And so the beginning of this skyrocket was because of the American influence in our warriors. So that's a little bit of the context.
I'd love to add a little bit to that, Kenny. I think you did such a good job of like talking about how the American War, specifically the Vietnamese war, kind of shaped some of that. And I think it even preceded some of that as well. Like when we think back to the Faith Act of like 1875, where it excluded Asian women from immigrating to the States. Primarily Chinese prostitutes, because they were seen as this temptation for white men, or like some kind of that they would threaten white male morality and ethics, or seen as carriers of venereal diseases. That, and followed, like not seen after like 7 years later in 1882, where the Chinese Exclusion Act also barred particular Asian communities from immigrating. And all of these are connected, these examples of institutionalized racism, to these acts of imperialism as well. And wanted to highlight Full Metal Jacket, and bringing some of the stereotypes that you have listed, Kayleen, into like American media, and being heard of maybe like "We Love You Long Time" or something like that. That also came up in conjunction with the histories that really has elaborated on.
Thank you guys for sharing that insight, because it definitely is providing me with some insider knowledge that I didn't know, or wasn't too familiar with. I can honestly say that my first experience with this whole concept, and I may be wrong, but it's a movie called Memoirs of a Geisha. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, and how, I guess you can say, going off of what Elizabeth just stated, how Hollywood and just American society has perpetuated this theme. That was really my first time really seeing it when I think that was the Vietnam War in that movie. Don't quote me, I'm not 100% sure, but how they took something that was a form of marriage, with chastity and fertility, and then all of a sudden it became something completely drastic once the war came. For whatever reasons that may be, but that was my first exposure. So now being able to hear you guys talk, provide a little bit more historical context to that, A, makes me want to go rewatch that movie before I can have it with a different lens, but B, also do some more research so I can be more knowledgeable about those topics. So thank you.
So I think many of us right now watching this, especially for those that have not been in the work of understanding our own implicit biases, our minds are probably, but even for those that are in the work of doing such, our minds are being blown right now, and just realizing where this comes from. And so what do we do with that? Where do we go from? We recognize like that this hypersexualization has been here for a while. What do we do? That's kind of a large question. Maybe we can come back to that and as we get further in this conversation. But let's stay with you all. How does this history, and I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but you came to understand this history. How has that impacted you? And how is that still, do you feel like the hypersexualization is still alive and present? Does it still impact in your daily life? These stereotypes? Give us some insight into you and your experiences. Or if you don't want to share personal experiences, maybe overall, societal.
I'll start, and then maybe whoever wants to jump in from the panel about their experiences. Simply understanding like how different Asian women have been impacted, and like a lot of the hypersexualization, the fetishization, the exotification, is all particular to the, like, Asian women aren't just a monolith, but they are treated like that in a lot of the media and like a lot of the stereotypes. When I think about what I've had to deal with in terms of comments from men, and then not just white men in North America, but men more broadly who draw on Asian stereotypes, specifically for Asian women. It is infuriating to hear because it's dehumanizing, and like all of these like really insidious and objectifying stereotypes kind of they just don't see us. They see us as what the media has also cultivated, just like this receptacle of their fantasies of the Orient. And I use that very specifically because that is how they're depicted. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can share an experience.
Yeah.
So my experience on like dating apps, I'm not going to specify which kind of dating apps, but I often get stereotyped and like fetishized in certain ways because I am an Asian woman. I am young. I identify as very small, petite, short, and I get these like mixed like these perceptions of being like a submissive type or like a kinky personality. And I've had comments on like some of these dating apps like, oh, I'm like a female slave, like come clean, come cook for me, come be like my arm candy, like I'll spoil you type of things. And it's just very dehumanizing that it's just a dating app that I'm getting these comments.
Yeah.
Adding on to that, it's not just the men that like dehumanize and objectify Asian. So we most commonly see it throughout history and through entertainment industries, like what Elizabeth said. Like even comedians talk about it, like saying like, oh, it's like I'm not like all the white guys are going for Asian girls, and then they dehumanize us just because we fit the yellow fever is what we call it. And like all these things. And so we're not getting pushback, not just because of like Asian men, but we're also getting it from, I mean, not Asian men, I mean, white men, but having it from other demographic groups too, like the other women. So they're being berated. Sorry, can't pronounce today, about from both sides. And so there are societal expectations and pressures that cater to what we have to face like growing up. Because personal experience, I am small, like they already see me as a delicate little flower, and they don't expect me to do like things that normal people can do. They think that, oh, you're too weak to do something, which makes it upsetting because it's like, what makes me different from this person? What makes me different from other people? And so like I always feel like they underestimate me to the point where I'm just like, am I really capable of doing things? And so that's how it impacted me throughout you know, my whole entire life, is because everyone just pushes me, and they're just like, oh, you're not, you know, these stereotypes and like the ideas, like, oh, you have to fulfill these ideas. And let's say I am in traditional gown, they're like, oh, you're so pretty, you can do so much better, you know, like on like a normal basis. And I'm just like, why exactly should I uphold these? And it's like, oh, Asian women are always like this, you should like be more like them. And I was like, okay, no, I'm my own person. And so all of these comments and these stereotypes and these ideas of what I have to be pushes me back in society and say, hey, I can't, if I do this, I'm not really a woman. If I do this, then the other group is going to be mad at me. And so there's no fair way to continue in this society and be in a good, like, I don't know, area that I could continue and, you know, do what I do without all these judgments and these expectations of being able to live on and be normal in, you know, in the US.
Keelan, you bring up such a good point that I didn't even think of, that, you know, there's, coming to this conversation, I was thinking about how society and individuals dehumanize the Asian woman, but it's also the self, dehumanizing the self, right? Based off what you've consumed your whole life. Like, you are receiving the message that you are an ornament, right? For lack of a better word, that you're not, but that's the message you're receiving, right? And that as you're coming into yourself and you're navigating who you are and how you view yourself in this world, you have to navigate that. And I navigate that on a very small level. I can't imagine. And that's something that's really helpful for me to understand in supporting individuals in my life. So thank you for sharing that and shining that light for me.
I have a follow-up question for you ladies, because I can only imagine how exhausting that is. What advice would you give the next generation, or put it in context of Utah, an incoming freshman, an incoming graduate student who has to navigate those same waters, based off of your experience of how you either navigated that, or what would you suggest or how they handled those types of situations and conversations and beliefs about them own selves?
I can go first. My advice is, you don't fit in a box. We all have intersecting parts that make us who we are. And if you are pushed into a box, break out of it. Because we are the people that define who we are. People can't define who we are because they don't know everything about you. So being able to express yourself and being out of the box, that's how we can be who we are and not take all of these things and get stuffed in a box. So that's what I like to say.
Something I wish I knew when I was younger, like when I was in elementary school and I would get these nicknames, you know, making fun of my eyes and things like this. I wish I was able to stand up for myself and be like, hey, like, I know you have good intentions, but I don't like when you use that nickname for me. It's kind of degrading. So just to be able to stand up for myself and say something in the moment instead of having it build up and be frustrated with it in the future.
I think what you mentioned there, Jenny, like this orientation of just like these things that are like small, like or what seems to be small microaggressions, like they accumulate. They I don't all these names that are subtle and not so subtle add to this feeling that we are foreign, that we don't belong, that we are less than. And I think if I'm not sure if that question was like to future like AAPI generation or like to people who are not. But kind of building on what Jenny and Kaylin have said, just understanding our own histories is really important. Like we don't, I personally did not learn that much in my Canadian high school or middle school about Chinese history and like what indentured Chinese laborers had to do and like the immigration acts that were also exclusionary to Chinese communities there until much later on in life. And I think understanding our own communities like resilience and history can help us like see our own strengths and also understand like how that racism towards our own communities is very particular, maybe shared across other communities. And so I suppose like the advice there is to understand like our roots a little bit more. I personally didn't until much later. And I think it helps us understand how we are connected to each other.
So I want to ask a kind of a different question that goes a different direction, but also relating. So, and this kind of goes back to, this is within microaggressions. And also, Jenny, I want to go back to what you said about the comments that you've received through dating apps, which, by the way, I am so sorry that people feel comfortable behind a screen to say whatever they want. You would be amazed the things that we hear in our office that people feel comfortable behind a screen, and know that you're not alone and that you don't deserve to be spoken to that way. And if you ever need support, please come talk to us. But I think that it's really common for us when microaggressions happen, or especially online dating generally, no matter what, when comments like that are made, that we brush them off really lightly, and they've kind of been normalized, especially with online dating, and they're not okay. So let me just put that out there. It's not okay to say what you want online and treat people how you want online, okay? Consent still applies online. But that was just a little tangent note. Back to the conversation. What I found in the work that I do, preventing violence, specifically in Utah, when I started this work, I expected, because of what had been fed to me through media, that perpetrators of violence were going to be these monsters that were just like evil people that wanted to cause harm and just horrible, right? That's not the case. The majority of the time, it is good people who don't understand, who don't know better, who in my line of work, right, haven't learned consent. They don't, or in this case, like don't understand microaggressions. They don't understand the history of what they're saying. They don't understand that they are under the influence of hypersexualizing Asian women, right? That making the assumption that because you appear to be of Asian descent, that you're going to cook, clean, and be submissive, like, right? They don't understand that that is harmful, right? And for some, educating they feel bad. And in most cases, once educated, they want to change their behavior. Some cases they don't. Okay, I will put that out there. But let's pretend we're working with people who want to change their behavior, but are maybe like slightly resistant, right? Or just confused, that middle ground. What do you want them to know? I guess is what I'm trying to get at, right? Because for me, when I'm talking to perpetrators of violence, a lot of people, and let me back up. When I'm talking to individuals about violence, they think I would never do that to somebody. I would never insult somebody. I would never push the boundaries with somebody. When in reality, most of us have been in a situation where we push somebody's boundaries. But pride gets in the way of us being willing to admit that we could potentially hurt somebody, right? But in order to really change a system, we have to be willing to admit that and change our behavior to move forward. So I guess what messaging, if there's somebody on here viewing this that has perpetrated harm in the past, whether it's been through a comment they've made, like a microaggression or worse, what message would you give them about moving forward, changing their behavior? Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? And if that's too big of a question, that's okay too, but I just think too often the only message that people who have perpetrated harm get is you're horrible and like you can never change and shame on you, which I get, like the behavior is not okay. Is no explanation, like no justification for it, but the person can still, I believe, move forward. Correct me if you feel otherwise, but I don't know. What would you say?
I will take a stab at that one from an outsider. Thinking of my favorite Iyanla Benzen, they would have to do their work. They have to be willing to put in that work, be willing to accept and take accountability, responsibility, and realize that their version of reality is screwed, misconstrued in some form or fashion. And once they have that acceptance, I do wholeheartedly, I guess this is the religious part of me, feel that they will be able to make that turn. I'm also very optimistic. I do understand that it is not for everyone, but that in the perfect world, if I could have it that way, I would like for people to be able to take that turn. But they are going to have to do their work and not expect members of the AAPI community to do that work for them. They can do different variations of research because doing your work is all about research. But at the same time, I do think that when people try to do their work, they go back to the individuals that have been violated or hurted or disrespected or whatever the case may be. And that can reiterate different variations of trauma. Now I'm going into psychiatry. So Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, because that is your area. I don't do that. But I do feel that that can stir up different and bad conversations. But if the person is willing to do their work, I think a lot can grow and come from that.
I actually want to stay with you for just 1 second, if that's okay. And I want you to talk about, because you're talking about how, individuals' perspective is misconstrued. And I want you to talk about, because we've talked about this before, just media, and how that has impacted individuals' truth. And
Yes.
accuracy.
Media has, the media is media. Let's just start with that. It has a huge influence on any population, any demographic, any culture, any country, especially I can say that I am a pre-technology baby. So back in the old days, we only got stuff in the newspaper. Um, and now we have access to the entire world just at our fingertips. And with that knowledge, we have different people, whether it's news anchors, whether it's journal writers, editors, whatever, YouTube, I guess you can call them overnight celebrity, whatever. I don't know the proper name for that. But you have all of these different opinions and perspectives coming into play, and they're not always good. So you have biased opinions, opinionated opinions. Then you also do have some factual information, some evidence. And then you have credible sources. You have people who have done this type of work or research that know the historical context that these young ladies have mentioned earlier and can provide a different perspective and an appropriate and correct perspective while relaying current events or different truths. Well, excuse me, it's only one truth, different perspectives, I'll put it that way. And I think when people tend to go to someone like a Twitter, because Twitter is considered a media outlet, and you have all of these different and drastic opinions coming on about one particular conversation, if people go there with any type of current event and that's all that they see, or if that's their first interpretation of the current event, their whole terministic screen can easily get miscued. And then all of a sudden they're looking at opinions thinking that they're facts because there are hundreds and thousands of people commenting on the exact same thing in the exact same way. Without doing their research to go and see where's the root of this story, who has factual information, who has evidential information that I can actually figure out what is the truth of this story, and then start compiling the layers. Because I really do think the foundation of how we perceive news is not solid. And until we make that solid by realizing and understanding where to go to these different outlets, where to go to get different information, that's going to be the starting place for us to get on the right track, to get truthful information. And there's many ways that you can do that. Again, I teach, so I actually have students do that in an assignment. And it's part of the one thing I can say there's many things I can say I'm proud about at USU, but one thing in particular with the writing studies program is that one of their marquee assignments focuses on that. Looking at current events and trying to figure out, 6 different categories for bias, opinion, evidence, factual information to teach students how to find the root of everything that I was just saying. And that way they are able to report on what it is that they're finding to a specific audience. So there are ways that you can do it. Again, I think it just requires people to get out of the easy accessibility of just a phone or being a click away from, again, something like Twitter, and actually going to the root of a story to figure out what exactly happened first and then taking it from there.
Thank you. And I asked you to take us through that process because I think that when we say like research and do the understanding on your own, it takes that critical level of thinking, not only with the news that you're consuming, but every thought that you have takes like that level of thinking that you need to go back and think, I read this news article and why was I more accepting of this one than this one? Like, what is it within me? Or, what has been portrayed to me in movies that like makes this incident seem fine, or like makes this sexualization of Asian women normal to me. Like, that doesn't actually make sense. Why am I hypersexualizing one population, right? And so just like this deeper level of thinking has to be taking place as we research. Research isn't just reading a bunch of articles, it's this critical level thinking that has to take place. So that's why I just wanted you to expand on that a little bit and make sure we had space for that. Anybody else want to add just what you would tell somebody? I know we kind of digressed a little bit, but
Can you reiterate your original question?
yeah, sorry. It's been, we were just saying for those who may have perpetrated violence in the past,
Right.
just like message you would give them about moving forward.
Yeah, I'd actually like to use myself as a point of somebody who has said stuff that I wish I didn't. And a lot of it comes from internalized misogyny and internalized racism, internalized homophobia. And one example, and I think this is relevant to how we think about how Asian women or like women more broadly are impacted by violence, and that comes around victim blaming and like the small things we do to ask like, why were you still continuing that interaction? Or like, why didn't you just take yourself out of it? And like all those very small nuance, like small things that you wouldn't necessarily catch because it's like you're not directly saying, no, she was wearing this, but underneath is the assumption that that there was some blame or some responsibility to take themselves out of the situation. So I totally, and it was only through friends who are patient enough with me to kind of like talk to me about it. And I do want to connect that later to when we talk about the Atlanta shooting, how these kinds of messages around victim blaming and like how horophobia kind of like comes in, as well to like the ways that we end up perpetuating those as well in our communities. So
Yeah, we can actually jump right into that now. I do want to add really quickly that on that note, you know, I've been having this conversation a lot recently because there's been a lot of talk of like saying like that person wouldn't do that because whether it's, you know, a hate remark or a violent act, that person wouldn't do that because they're a good person. And I had this conversation with somebody the other day where I said, you know, the only reason that we think that bad people do these things is because movies show us bad people do these things. But I've been doing this work for 5 years, and the majority of times that, or the majority of instances that come into our office are good people that perpetrate harm, right? Are good people that perpetrate harm. It's not bad people that are jumping out of bushes or in dark alleys or like those monsters that I originally thought, right? The only reason you think it's a bad person is because movies have showed us that it's the bad guy of the movie. But it usually is the good person, the good people. They're not, we all perpetrate harm on some level at some point in our life, right? And so just because you have said something or done something, you can always own your actions and change your behavior moving forward. But let's move on to what Elizabeth brought up, talking about the shooting that happened the beginning of March 9th, which actually spurred this whole conversation and putting together this conversation. It was the shooting that happened in Atlanta. And it was actually sad when I was looking up quotes. I had to do digging because there's been so many mass shootings since then. So that was sad. Just a side note. But we're talking about this mass shooting on March 9th that happened in the massage parlors that killed 8 people, of Asian descent, 6 of who were Asian women. And the shooter had told police that I'm looking at the quote, sorry, that he had a sexual addiction and had carried out the shootings at the massage parlors to eliminate his temptation. And the shooter had denied racial animus, even though a lot of media outlets were reporting that there might be bias involved. So I just want to open it up to this group about really anything that you want to talk about in regards to that incident, how that incident impacted you, what your thoughts on the reasoning, what your thoughts are on the reasoning given by the shooter, how media portrayed this incident and circulated this incident. Let's talk about it, because I think this incident left a lot of people uneasy, rightfully so. So let's talk.
Sorry, I just realized I left myself unmuted. I can just go first, and then maybe whoever in the panel wants to jump in. It is difficult to talk about some of these things when people don't share the same vocabulary around how white supremacy, how toxic and hegemonic masculinity play a role in this, and how like this sex worker discrimination also kind of play into this. And when we kind of go into the vocabulary of like good person, bad person, we miss how society has kind of constructed or like made certain narratives of like okay that have like allowed for these men from like 1982 to 2021 are 98% of the perpetrators of mass shootings. And when we kind of go through their reasoning, just take it at face value, what the shooter said is a sex addiction, or what the officer who in the county said he was having a bad day, we forget, or media forgets, or they've forgotten how systemic racism, how systemic anti-Asian hate kind of play into this, and how, as Helene has brought up before, all of these stereotypes of Asian sex workers, Asian women being sex workers, like play into their imagination and how that plays out. And so I think what the shooter has said and what the police officers have said is bold, but it is indicative of like what they see and like what they don't see, which is like their actions aren't reflective of some of the male white privilege. And it's not just like privilege, like privileges like having easier access, but like this is a complete dehumanization of these Asian women. And so I think we have to remember that.
I like what you shared, Elizabeth. My opinions on what happened, I don't agree with how the media advertised everything. And they constantly failed to address certain crimes that revolve with minority groups in general. They don't understand like the systemic racism and the social, inequalities that happen because, of these reported cases. And you most often see there are like reports or incidents that never get highlighted in the news. There has been a lot of AAPI hate crimes throughout the nation, but you don't see every single one of them being highlighted in the news. And it's heartbreaking that this tragedy was one of the main AAPI hate incidences that are covered on the news. And so how that affects me as a person is that, okay, I'm scared for my female Asian friends, because what if there's someone that has like this idea and have like this constant, I guess, rejection from this type of demographic, that they would commit this type of crime. This is like mentally, like, it messes with you mentally, because it's like, okay, I'm an Asian woman. Even if I'm like walking in a group, do I still feel safe? Is there any protection regarding to that? And so that affects on how we, function in life. And so after this incident, where I had like a conversation with some of my friends, and, they're like, I'm scared. Like, it's a threat to not only like to, ourselves, but it's like, it's a huge impact to our community, because it's like, oh, because it seemed like in a way, like they just targeted this area because there was majority Asian women working at the massage place. And so it's like, okay, if I work in somewhere that has like predominantly Asian, am I going to be a target? So that just kind of like is the mental thinking and the impact of like what this happened. Because what if I'm going to be one day get shot down like that and become part of the news? That's like a constant fear. And that's what happens with mass shootings. And that's what happens, especially in a place and an environment where, we're concerned, especially with the rise of the pandemic. There are a lot of cases of, violence amongst our community that isn't reported. And, like, it happens here in Cache County and throughout the state that no one really talks about, because we want to focus on the positivity, quote unquote. And, like, if we aren't able to recognize that this stuff happens, like for me, when, there was an experience with one of my friends that happened locally, I'm like, I didn't know Logan would be capable of doing that. That is the mentality that we have until someone says something, like, so with the incidences that happen, like you start to realize this is more of a issue throughout, like everywhere, not just here. So like it impacts how we function and how we live on in life. And, and also the idea of like, people like kind of reaching out only because of this event that happened. You get like a lot of individuals reach out and be like, hey, I heard about this. I know like your community has been like dealing with all this. It's like, where have you been? Like, where have you been like this whole entire time until this incident? That's my question. It's like, do you really care if this, like, do you really care on like how we're feeling truly, or is this just a story to you? So that's kind of like how I felt with this whole situation. So yeah.
Thank you.
I want to add like a small piece to, as Feeling was talking about how it personally affected her. hearing the anti-sex worker comments and discourse, and some of the comments was really difficult to process because it them working in massage parlors, it was associated with sex work, whether or not they were sex workers themselves. And I think really addressing where that comes from as well, and like where like that misogyny, they all deserve to live. And when reasonings like sex addiction comes up, I feel like it serves to dehumanize the woman. And yeah, I think that that's another layer that was personal to me. And I think we just have to think about how these things come up in media and in conversation. And like Jamal Jared has said, like really looking at not just what the mass are saying about a particular subject, but really getting to the roots of like how things are being discussed and like where they come from. There was a small incident in Logan when I moved here. A white man, I was like shopping, I was in Smith's doing groceries, and a white man just approached me and played with my hair and just came up to me, squishing it, and like laughed to himself and then kept walking. And I didn't know how to receive it. I was shocked that someone felt that kind of entitlement to my body and my space. And yeah, stuff like this happens in Logan. And
Yeah, I would like to share an experience that happened to me in Logan as well. This was probably just right as COVID was, getting populated by the news, and a lot of people were panic buying. And my mom sent me to the store with my aunt to go buy some water. So I went to Lee's and I, put 2 cases of water into my cart. There was a whole pallet of plenty of water for everybody, but they were limiting 2 per person, which was totally fine. And I heard from another aisle, these 2 men were talking to each other, and they made a comment of like, look at those Asians taking all the water. And I was like very upset. I was like, I can hear you. And I had the urge to turn around and say something, but I was scared to say something. I didn't want to confront them in case something were to escalate. And that's the last thing I wanted. So I just shrugged it off. I just went to check out, and I can still hear them talking behind me and saying all these negative things about like, just because I'm Asian, I'm buying water is a problem to you. And I was very upset, and that like moment stuck with me. And it was just a powerful moment where I was like really reflective, like it's hard.
Yeah. I want to thank you, and please like interrupt me if you want to say more, but I want to thank you each so much for sharing how that incident impacted you. I know it's not easy to share your experiences and to share specifically what's happened to you in the Valley. And I think I'm a huge believer that like you shouldn't have to bleed in order for people to care. And I hope you didn't feel that way, but hopefully people realize that like we do have to change, that it's on those who aren't part of the AAPI community to say something, to be educated, and to stand up when they see harm, or to have difficult conversations with their peers to change our culture and our society. And I thank you all for being willing to share your experience, because you really shouldn't have to. But I appreciate you being willing to share it in this space. And Elizabeth, I just want to touch on, I really appreciate you bringing the concern of the stereotypes and discrimination against sex workers into this space. And I actually think I'm going to host a coffee and conversation on that as well, because that's been something that I've been noticing a lot this past year. Just having conversations, because over the pandemic, OnlyFans has been something that a lot of individuals have used as a way to make money. And the shame associated with that has been insane. And it's just something that, no one should ever be shamed for being a sex worker, as long as it's consensual and that's something that they're proud to be a part of, then why are we shaming them? And most definitely nobody ever asked to be murdered because they're a sex worker. So I think that that's definitely something that I will be reaching out to you about having a conversation about. I know we're at time, but I'm willing to continue talking if you are all still have a little bit of availability. I see, Jamal, you are unmuted. Did you have something that you wanted to say?
I just wanted to thank these young women and for sharing their experiences and for being vulnerable, because it's never easy. But I do want to acknowledge that I hear you, I see you, I appreciate you. I am here to support you in any way possible. And I am just grateful that you have taken the time to at least enlighten me on these conversations and topics, so that way I can at least become a better ally. Because a lot of people feel that allyship, once you take a course, you're it, that's it. That's a constant and revolving process. And it changes and it grows with you, just like a newborn child. You have to go with the times. So thank you.
And actually, speaking of allyship, I do want to finish with the final question. If you all are willing to stay in this space, if you have to go, please feel free. But I just want to end with the question, what can each of us do, or for anyone who's watching this, what can they do to build a safer environment, to be a better ally for the AAPI community?
Break down barriers and stereotypes by asking questions, open-ended questions of why they think that. And then, getting into depth about it, so that it opens that conversation of being able to recognize that they have this implicit bias. It makes them realize hey, maybe this way of thinking is wrong. Maybe I should analyze things before I say something like that and do better next time. And I think that's a really good way to become a great ally, not just for the AAPI community, but for all marginalized and minoritized communities. Is just asking questions and making them think about the topic in depth and recognize that maybe this is the wrong thing. So yeah.
I always say respectfully challenge to my advocates. When somebody says a remark that makes you want to just be like, what did they just say? Just respond with a respectfully challenging question and just keep asking questions until they stop.
I actually love what Kayleen just stated, and it reminds me of a devotion book that I was just reading called Every Choice is a Seed, where you have to be willing to challenge your thought process and figure out where or what is the root of this particular belief. Where did it come from? How can I challenge that belief? And not only that, how can I now replace it with the truth? Again, that goes back to doing that type of work. But I love that what Kayleen stated, because I think that's spot on. And being able to, I think in the process of receiving and asking those questions, I always tell people to have a level of mercy. with anybody, even if they are doing you wrong or treating you disrespectfully. It does not justify their behavior, but having a level of mercy. Let me rephrase that. Have a level of mercy, because you never understand or know exactly what a person is going through or what type of demons they're battling, internally, externally, what have you. And I think having the ability to choose to be kind is going to be key here, especially with sensitive topics. And one thing that I can say that I do not like about this Logan, or the state of Utah in general, is that now that I've been here for 3 years, yes, you are a we tend to be more passive, and everything is kumbaya, and no one wants to take accountability. No one wants to step up and be in that light of taking accountability. And that's, I think, why half the university either loves or hates me. There's no middle ground, because I typically go against that. And I'm very direct because I come from a completely different culture, that being on the East Coast, where we value frankness, and transparency. And I say all of that is to just say thank you, Kayleen. I think you're spot on with your recommendations and suggestions.
So one of the takeaways that I would like to share is don't be a bystander, be upstanding. So if you see something, say something. Because you can be at the, you could be right at the situation and still not say something that can still have the potential to cause harm. So say something if it makes you uncomfortable. Just step out of your comfort bubble just for a little bit and be that supportive for someone else.
Yes.
Absolutely. Like if you feel safe to say something, especially if you're not, the minority in question who's, being under whatever microaggression, definitely say something. I think what Jamal Jared had said about grace, some level of mercy, I think is important. I think they'll have to depend person to person, like where their energy levels are at to kind of walk someone through this. But I personally believe that in the work of allyship too, it is messy and it is uncomfortable. And most people really just do want to do better. And I do think an approach that has that kind of grace and understanding for others is a helpful posture. I think one thing is to not just like enjoy, Asian-owned businesses or media or like art, but to continue to advocate and to uplift, like Ben has mentioned, like being an upstander in these situations. So, yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for this conversation. I know it was something I needed today, and hopefully you all felt the same way. We will be placing it on our website later this week, so you can all share it. And I encourage everybody to share it with somebody, so that hopefully they can start the conversation with somebody else. And that's how we change the world. But thank you all so much again for joining today. And I hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you. You all take care.